The Lavender Odyssey by John W. Lavender. Chapter 7, Lavender Ancestors. When Christopher was about 11, I took him on a trip back to England. I thought it might be interesting for him to become acquainted with the lavender side of his ancestry. We stayed with my parents, and my sister Jeanette made a special trip from Austria to visit. She said she was willing to drive us around on our quest. Our first port of call was the registry office, where we checked out our genealogy. The registry clerk said their records only went back to the census in 1851. I asked the clerk where we might find additional records, and she directed us to Lewes, which is the county seat for East Sussex. They likely had copies of church registries concerning births, baptisms, weddings, deaths, and so forth. The registry clerk also said that the library at Hastings had the Mormon records. The Mormons were known for collecting ancestry data due to their practice of baptizing the dead. The Mormon microfiche records were hard to follow. But what did become apparent was that many lavenders were found to reside around the tiny village of Warburton, which was only 5 miles from where I was born. The Mormon genealogical search also went back to 1534. Henry VIII having instituted parish records during the Protestant Reformation. There was, however, another source, the Doomsday Book, the meaning of which refers to all people alive at the end of days. The Doomsday Book, or Book of Winchester, was a survey of much of England and parts of Wales, completed in 1086 by order of William the Conqueror. I decided to go to Warburton and see if there were any lavender tombstones there. My parents had not been helpful about my interest in our genealogy. I got the definite impression they preferred not to know. However, my father did give me the remaining parts of a family Bible, but it didn't reveal anything beyond my great-grandfather. My sister, Christopher, and I drove to Warburton, which was in the vicinity of Battle, where the Normans began their conquest of Britain in 1066. We found the village of Warburton on the map and drove in the general direction. At Netherfield, we drove to Wood's Corner, but missed the turning to Warburton and ended up in Old Heathfield. "It's not well signed," complained my sister. I said I had seen a sign at the junction for an Anglican church. I suggested we check it out. We parked and entered All Saints' Church gate, passing a host of dilapidated headstones. Most of the engravings were worn away and unreadable due to their age and acid rain. Entering the vestry through the main door of the church, we were immediately struck by the stained glass windows. The sun was shining through them and casting shafts of light onto the sanctuary floor. I rummaged through some dog-eared pamphlets at the back of the church, while Jeanette explored the nave. "Look at this," Jeanette called out. She was standing in front of a stained glass window that had been recently installed. The plaque underneath said the window commemorated the founding of an early colony in Jamestown, Virginia, USA. The Reverend Robert Hunt, vicar of Old Heathfield, had sailed with colonists from London in December 1606 on a ship called the Susan Constant. Eventually, they chose to settle at a site in Virginia, Jamestown, named after the King James I. The plaque said that the site was chosen for its defensive position rather than its suitability for a colony. The Reverend Hunt was said to have celebrated the first Anglican communion on American soil on June 11, 1607. I thought it was possible that one of our ancestors might have accompanied the Reverend Hunt to the colonies. Jeanette didn't share my speculation and found some information about Robert Hunt in the narthex. It appeared that the Reverend did not have an unscathed career before his departure to the colonies. On account, he was forced to leave his parish due to having had an adulterous affair with his servant, Thomasina Plummer. He was also accused of absenteeism and for neglecting his congregation. Consequently, he was recruited to join the Virginian expedition by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Richard Bancroft. I suppose it took half a century for his reputation to become unstained enough to be celebrated in colored glass, and at the very place they had him fired. Sinners sometimes become saints, Jeanette said, ironically, and suggested we move on to Warbleton. We finally arrived in the village of Warbleton and went straight to St. Mary's Church. The cemetery and gardens were well kept, and someone was trimming bushes. We walked around the gravestones for a while, but it was the same story. Acid rain had worn off the engraved names, except for a few recent graves. We approached the groundsman and asked him what he knew about the families that were buried in the graveyard. "I only know about the Martyrs stone," he said. "There's a memorial over there by the wall." On the fence facing the road, we found a commemoration stone. The inscription read, 1888. Close by, in the meadow behind, stood the abode of Richard Woodman, farmer and ironmaster, burnt at Lewes, 22nd of June, 1557. St. John, XV 12. I wrote down the reference, John 15, verse 12, and went inside the church to look it up in a Bible. The cryptic words from St. John's Gospel say, "He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." Inside St. Mary's Church, we found more information. Richard Woodman was born in Buxted, a few miles from Warbleton, in 1524. He was burnt as a Protestant martyr at the age of 33 in front of the Star Inn, together with 9 others: George Stevens, Alexander Hoseman, William Maynard, Thomasina Wood, Marjorie Morris, James Morris, Dennis Burgess, Anne Ashton, and Mary Groves, none of them Lavenders. This occurred during the short reign of Bloody Mary, who was Catholic. Many of the churches in England switched from being Catholic to Protestant and back again, I said. Same church building, but opposing religions. It says here that Richard Woodman was examined by church officials, and they managed to get him to admit to heresy. "How do you feel about being a martyr?" I asked Jeanette. "Well, we don't know if Richard Woodman was actually related to us," she said. "No, but it's possible. We're all martyrs of one kind or another," she replied. Christopher had to endure all this. He spent most of his time in the car reading a book. His interests were elsewhere, and so I decided to take him on excursions that might please him.